Welcome to episode 18 of the SumerSports Show. I'm Eager, I'm VP of Research and Development at SumerSports, and I'm joined by the CEO of SumerSports, Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, we had a fun show on Monday. I really loved just talking corner with you, getting your perspective on things. I've gotten nothing but really good feedback about the discussions about your time in Atlanta. For those of you who are new listener to the show, Thomas was the Atlanta Falcons GM for 12 years, won Executive of the Year twice, and obviously took the Falcons to helped the Falcons make the Super Bowl in 2016. Also, formerly of the Patriots, 2 Super Bowl rings there, as we talked about before. So I thought it was really good. I thought it was fun to talk about, because I do remember back when Dante Robinson played for the Falcons and like having some of those intuitions about his position and stuff. Right. And so that was a good discussion. And for those of you that are new to the show, we will be having those positional discussions every Monday. And this is our Wednesday show, which is more of a broader look into the league. So after this minute and a half long intro, Thomas, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a busy day. Coming back off the new year, of course. Like, that's a big deal, right? Just because we are full force, working on our SumerSports, all of our algorithms, all of our really, really important stuff that have so many layers to it that very well about, being a doctorate in mathematics, which, by the way, I always get my opportunity to brag about you that way. I often tell people, though, I don't often get an opportunity to talk about, how you approached it and the fine-tuned elements. Maybe one day you'll sit down with me with a beer or two or a glass of wine and really try to edify me a little bit on truly what you did, because I think it's fascinating. It wasn't football related. I think that is unbelievably fascinating.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because as you could probably tell, having listened to the show, and you and I being friends for a few years now, like how obsessed I am with football. But like there was a time in my life, right around, I was 20 years old or so, junior or senior in college. And, I was playing college football, and, I much rather would have gone and become a math professor. And so that's what I did. And so there was like a brief, year or two of my life where, I did not actually, in my PhD thesis, there is a paragraph. And I talked about this in one of my talks where I thanked, the 5 opponents my senior year of college that beat us by a combined 9 points, for showing me that football was not my optimal career path. And of course, I always use that as a joke to sort of like think about, back in 2012 when I was, graduating from grad school and going and becoming a math professor, jobs like the ones that we have, Thomas, they didn't exist. And so, for a lot of young people, you think about that where, your career could be whatever you want it to be. And in fact, your career is often something that actually doesn't exist when, you're younger. And that was certainly the case for me. So that, I did go into, something that was much different than football. And weirdly, as the sport draws you back. And so now I get to not only work on really cool algorithms with some of the best minds in football, but I also get to chat football with you, which is obviously a privilege and something I don't send you all of these, but I do get a lot of DMs on Twitter from people who are like, wow, it's really cool that you get to talk to Thomas Dimitroff about his career as the GM of the Falcons twice a week on the show. So and I certainly do never take that lightly.
Well, look, the opportunity to sit here and talk about everything under the sun. Obviously, you and I do a lot more than we can even get to on the show here, right? Sometimes I imagine like just going as long as we can truly go. I don't know if that's a positive thing. I know we try to look at it as an hour and a little bit. You and I know we could go on and speak for hours at a time, which this is not a long form session. I get it, but it's exciting to know that we have the ability to do so.
Yeah. And we have the ability to do so. I do want to touch on this. We do have the ability to do so because, NFL players and obviously, people within the league, they have, they go through great sacrifices to play the game, obviously that we love. And obviously for us, we make a career of. And, on Monday Night Football, we were, privy to a situation that kind of jarred us, right? Hamlin, Damar Hamlin, the safety for the Buffalo Bills, gets up from a hit on T. Higgins, collapses on the field, ends up having cardiac arrest. My initial thoughts when that happened were, and you played as well in college, and just to give people a little bit of an idea, you're initiated every single year with videos of like what can happen to you, right? And you sign waivers, and people. I don't think people realize how much these guys love the game, and how much sometimes we can get drunk by that. And when that happened, and you saw the looks on the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals faces, it was very clear that we could not play that game the rest of the night, right? And it was very clear. And it's important when we are a part of this, and this was true in COVID as well. This is true whenever you have a horrific injury, and we hope Damar Hamlin is okay. It seems to be that he is improving, which is good. And obviously, I'm sure he and his family appreciate all the thoughts and the prayers that people are giving, and the people who are donating to his toy drive. But when we all surround ourselves, and our nation's religion is a game that is violent, we do have to make sure that we know when enough is enough. And Monday night, enough was enough. And I'm glad that the league stepped in. And even though it's complicated now because of what you have to do with that Bengals versus the Bills game, I'm really happy that the league stepped in and worked on behalf of the players and their safety, and also their wishes.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head without rambling about it. I mean, it was such an emotional time watching that. Anyone who has ever played football, and this, or any sport that has any element of safety being an issue, that's complicated, right? You go in, remember, as a football player, I don't care what level you played at. When you were going into a game, just at the back of your mind, you're thinking something could happen that could be catastrophic. And then you put it away, right? Because you get the first hit and everything is fine. And watching how that all played out was so emotional for me. And then thinking about it being a 1 in a billion plus situation as they are describing that. I'm not sure if we know exactly what it is, Eric, but getting hit at a certain time, a certain part of your heartbeat. I mean, that's unbelievable, right? That happened. And we pray for Damar, obviously. And it seems as though things are coming, coming around for him, of course. My own experience back when I was a scout for the Detroit Lions, you probably don't remember this, but a linebacker we had named Reggie Brown was on the field. They were trying to resuscitate him, and he was having a hard time, of course. And I think it was the same. There was an element there of swallowing. I don't know if it was his tongue or something, and it was really, really, really scary.
Yeah.
It had to do with a broken neck situation, and those are things. Again, we can talk forever about it. I believe in what the league did and their approach to it. And I hope they continue to do the right things as we start moving through this week.
Yeah, exactly. And you remember Mike Utley of the Lions, and Kevin Everett of the Buffalo Bills, and a lot of scary injuries. And I think too, and this is something where when you get to a place like you have in your career where you're truly an expert in something, you get to where I am in my career, where you have PhD in math and people look up to you and you're kind of at the top. Like, I think that there's a game respects game aspect of it, where I look at the paramedics and I look at the person administering CPR, and I look at all the protocols the league had in place to make sure that there was a person, because you're looking at brain damage, you're looking at all these things. And it's an important reminder to appreciate the people who are behind the scenes, and to appreciate the people who are commit their life to something that may not be as sexy as something you commit your life to, but it altogether shows the value inherent in expertise and in just executing a job with competence. Damar Hamlin, if Damar Hamlin makes it out of this, that the league, those people deserve obviously all the praise that is heaped onto them for a day that they signed up for when they did this. And so I think back, and I think of when I was younger, I broke my arm in a car accident, and it was a fairly traumatic thing for me. And the people that came to my assistance as quickly as possible to keep me from going into shock and all that. You think back, and there are just so many people who, we don't notice on a day-to-day basis who just commit their lives to helping other people. And those people deserve, I think, their flowers on a day like Monday night, and obviously a week like this week. So, those are things that, we don't always talk about, we don't always appreciate, but I think it's a good time to, sort of do so. And again, Damar Hamlin's not out of the woods, but, it does sound like things are trending in the right direction for him. And, I think it's just amazing how much of the NFL world and the fans have really rallied around his cause here. So, it's something encouraging to see in a situation that was not great.
I thought what was interesting last on this point, I got calls from other sports, Major League Baseball and basketball, people who are very reputable in the business at senior level positions, i.e. general managers, saying, can you send me what the NFL puts forward as far as what the expectations and how they are approaching this? Because it was unbelievable. They raved about them, and they all concerned themselves with, like, are we in the right place to do it in our league? So again, kudos to the NFL at many levels.
Yeah, for sure. And so, obviously that's a tough situation to talk about, but I do want to acknowledge it because it is something where, everybody involved is human. And, I think if you take the human element out of sports, it's incredibly hard to persist. So, speaking of competence, I want to talk about a team that has overcome a lot, right? I want to talk about the New York Giants. So let's talk about three things Eric believes here, which is a segment that we've done. The New York Giants, the last few years have been, sort of a truly poor team. Only winning 4 games and having a negative 158 point differential. Daniel Jones missed a lot of time. And up until this point, he had showed very little in the way of being a franchise quarterback. They've had, by all accounts, a very strong year, 9-6-1. Some of it can be fluky, but their point differential is 0, which is actually better than the point differential of the 12-4 Minnesota Vikings so far. And that is despite playing in a division where 2 teams have won 12 or more games, the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles, and another team, Washington, was 7-5 just a month ago or so. And so, when I look at this, Brian Daboll, in my opinion, should be the NFL Coach of the Year. And I know that he has a lot of competition. I know Nick Sirianni is a guy that could get that acclaim. I know, guys like Kevin O'Connell deserve a little bit of praise there. Even Kyle Shanahan dealing with a third-string quarterback and trending towards the 2 seed there. But I think Brian Daboll has done a fantastic job. I want to know, as far as your opinion is concerned on this, what do you think about Brian Daboll and the job he's done in New York?
Look, I really have a great deal of respect for Brian and always have. We worked together at New England. He always had an air about him. I mentioned this before. I mean, confidence, air. I mean, not only the physical walking down the hallway, but his belief in what he was putting together as a position coach all the way through to being being an offensive coordinator, having a mind and a creativity. And I've said this again and again about people that come through the Belichick paradigm. They know where to put their players in the best spot to make sure that they can thrive. And I think Brian came in here this year along with Joe Shane, who I think is, Joe's a young star in this business. And I think the two of them operating together, remember, by the way, a little aside, they work together. They know each other, which is a really, really interesting part to talk about. Maybe not now, maybe talking about SumerSports and eventual, helping owners, search for coaches in that mix. To have a head coach and a GM who know each other and have worked together and know the ins and outs, sometimes the warts as well, that can be a really positive thing. I think Brian Daboll definitely deserves to be in the running for that Coach of the Year. And I think it has not only to do with the play calling, not only to do with managing the entire team, but again, his ability to have a big picture and look how to in fact, sort of inject the talent in the certain spots in the right way and make the most out of them. And we start talking about, Saquon Barkley, and we start talking about Daniel Jones, which I know you're going to get into. To me, those are fascinating discussions. And I know you have some strong feelings about that. He's able to do it with those players who are really, Saquon really good, it's fun to watch what's happening with Daniel Jones. But in the end, what this guy does as far as a head coach, I mean, you got to give him massive thumbs up for his approach. And man, he does it with swagger. And I love the way he gets the team going. He's not worrying about this and that. He is worried about coaching his team and building the team and bringing the morale, and he's doing it.
Yeah, for sure. And you think about, Saquon Barkley, who, I think everybody believes is a wonderful player, over 1,000 yards the first 2 years in the league, 5.0 yards per carry, 4.6 yards per carry. He was rookie of the year in 2018. He led the league in all-purpose yards in 2018, but then you have 2 years worth of injuries. 2021, he averaged just 3.7 yards per carry. I think there were real concerns as to whether Saquon Barkley, not just was he worth the next contract, but was he even like a good enough player to help the Giants, in year 5? And, he probably, could win comeback player of the year. So like even elevating him, getting them an offensive line, going with Evan Neal, who graded out his best game as a pro Football Focus last week against Indianapolis. Like, you get him, and then you get Andrew Thomas, who continues to ascend into one of the best tackles in all of football. You get it, and I just think, there's an elevation there. But then, of course, Daniel Jones is a player that he didn't even get a 5th-year option exercised by the Giants. Like, he's not somebody that they're believing in. And if you adjust for all these things, like the fact that their wide receivers have been injured, Kenny Golladay, who the previous administration, a player, by the way, I liked. I thought Kenny Golladay was a pretty good receiver, and just didn't work out there. You have injuries, of course. You have the tight end. Evan Ingram didn't work out for them. So they're just drawing dead at the receiver position. And Daniel Jones is orchestrating not great offense, but offense that's better than what you would expect given what their talent level is on the outside. I think he deserves Coach of the Year. Now, I guess the question becomes now, if you're the Giants, there's characteristics of who wins Coach of the Year in the NFL. I mean, you look at the characteristics. Mike Vrabel, right? Mike Vrabel won Coach of the Year last year. His quarterback was Ryan Tannehill, another kind of quarterback who I think, to coin your phrase, he's okay, but he has some mediocre elements to him, right? He's not necessarily somebody you'd want to back you don't want to pay him what the upper tier guys are making. Prior to that, Kevin Stefanski was we talk about Baker Mayfield, but Baker Mayfield's a quarterback with some mediocre elements to them. John Harbaugh is another one. He won Coach of the Year. Now, that was the year Lamar won MVP, but Lamar has his warts. Namely, he can't stay on the field, and he's a little limited as a passer relative to how great he is as a runner. And then prior to that was Matt Nagy in 2018, who won with the Chicago Bears with Mitch Trubisky, who again, Mitch Trubisky didn't get a second contract, and he's no longer a starter in the league. And so I think about this from the Giants' perspective, and we can get drunk on the fact that, okay, they've had a great year. They've had a very encouraging year, right? They're probably not going to win the Super Bowl. They're going to draw Minnesota in round 1, which I actually think will be a good game. It was a good game 2 weeks ago. But if you're the Giants now, and this is the third thing Eric thinks here, I don't know if you take 2022 success as a mandate to continue to be the same team that you are now. I think you still have to consider other options at the quarterback position, and I think you have to consider other options around the roster, and you have to make sure that the Saquon Barkley contract works in conjunction with the rest of your roster, because we've seen this song and dance before. We saw it in Cleveland, where they give Nick Chubb the big contract, they give the guards the big contract, and they give Mayfield the go-ahead, and it fails, right? We saw it with, obviously, Chicago. We saw it again with Tennessee now, where they just buy back into the same run-first offense. They trade their best wide receiver, and now, they might win their division, but they're currently drawing dead. What do you think about that? Like, what would you do if you're the Giants? Because they're in a tough spot, right?
Very tough spot, very tricky. Let's start off by saying Joe Shane and Brian Daboll as guys coming in after drafting, of course, Daniel Jones. No one wants to talk about it. I had this discussion before on other players. They didn't pick them, so there's a little less pressure on it, right? Meaning, wow, there's a novelty element to it. They come in, they bring Daniel in thinking, okay, If this works, great. If it doesn't, this isn't our year. It doesn't kind of go, it's not a check mark against us or an X against us as team builders, right? Let's see what we have here and let's continue to build. If we have something, we can decide on how we're going to approach it. If not, then our sights are set. Now, they're in a fortunate situation, like you have alluded to with other coaches. They got the most out of Daniel Jones. I'm watching Daniel Jones. I was watching him today just to get more of a feel for what he was doing. And what I was amazed at is his ability to move, right? So it's the versatility. I mean, what's he have? I don't know, 3,200 yards or whatever it is up to date. He's got, he runs and he's running legitimately, not like Matt Ryan. I mean, he's running legitimately. So, you look at this as a GM and a head coach, back to the head coach, and you're saying, all right, we have something good here. Do we really believe that Daniel can be great? Or does he move up from that good to great idea, right? Does he move up 2 and 3 steps to be who you truly need to build for years to come? Obviously, they didn't feel that before, not renewing, on the 5th year. This, to me, I think what they need to do is they need to step back after the season, look at everything. But remember, everyone, and Eric, this is not just about the analytics and the stats. It's part of it. Find out where the kid is as a leader. Find out where the kid is from an injury standpoint. Find out how he interacts on so many different levels. What is truly his mental acuity? Yes, he's a Duke guy and all of that's great, but how does he situate? It appears that he's situating very well with Brian Daboll. So this could all be all things in line. Daboll and Shane may say, you know what? We're very fortunate here, and I'm a big believer in this. Let's go in. Let's look for a quarterback to wait in the wings. I still believe in that Aaron Rodgers approach. Maybe it's rare that you're going to get 4 years on it, but let's keep building. Let's figure out a really creative situation with Daniel Jones, and let's truly look at what if there is an opportunity to pick. But where are they going to pick right now? What are they projected to right now, Eric?
Yeah, so the Giants are picking 23rd if the season were to end today. And again, I think they're only going to be a field goal underdog to the Vikings. And, that one is a pretty, if they go to US Bank Stadium and win, obviously that hurts their draft stock. And so they might not even be able to access in the round one, the talent that they could, but this actually brings up a couple things I want to ask. So first off, I think that Daniel Jones right now reminds me of Alex Smith, right? Where, so and you brought up his movement skills, and that's what jarred my thought process. So Alex went, in San Francisco, and he had, I'm trying to remember the coordinator's name. He used to be the Dallas coordinator before Dan Quinn, Mike Nolan. Right? They have Mike Nolan. Then they have Mike Singletary. Right? Mike Singletary kind of benched him for Sean Smith or Sean King or Sean Hill. And then and then they brought him back in. And then when Harbaugh got into town, right, they gave him kind of a 1-year prove-it deal. They put a great defense around him. They played an easier schedule, and Alex Smith blossomed. And part of the reason Alex Smith was able to blossom was he had the physical ability to run the ball when things got bad. So you take away that physical ability and kind of everything else goes away. And Alex wasn't perfect, right? Alex, by the time he got to that point in his career, when he ran to run. He was never, once he decided to run, Alex Smith was running. He never could throw on the run. So he's a very limited guy, but he was very able. He got him 2 division titles, got him to the NFC title game once or twice, I think. But what the Niners did in 2011 is also instructive. They took, Colin Kaepernick in round 2 as a guy that they could, possibly have waiting in the wings, a guy that didn't have any expectations out of Nevada, Reno. And ultimately, when the time came to play him, it worked. And they lucked into a situation in 2013 where the Chiefs had the number 1 pick and had a lot of needs at quarterback, and there wasn't a quarterback worth taking in the first 15 picks. And so they could trade him for 2 seconds to the Kansas City. And Alex Smith had a pretty solid career in Kansas City. So, in my opinion, I agree with you. I think that the Giants should stick with Daniel Jones, use the franchise tag, use something that, not financially onerous to go with there. But then, get a quarterback late. And somebody brought this up to me in the league, which I thought was really smart, which was, I still think you take that guy in the late first round, because if he hits, that fifth-year option to you is worth more than the delta that you get between the first round pick and the second round pick. If a quarterback hits, that fifth-year option is worth so much to you. So I even think that they should use a back half of the first rounder on maybe Anthony Richardson or somebody else who's sort of in that like fringe first round range.
I think I think that's a really good thought. And on another note, I think very, very important. And I see that the fan base, right? They're behind him now, right? Because everyone likes that story, right? The guy got his butt knocked around and kicked around, right? People hating him, on him, left, right, and center. There's a resiliency factor on quarterbacks that to me is admirable. When you can deal with all that and keep moving forward, not only with his happy-go-lucky smile that he has there, but you pull for a guy like that, right? Yeah. And there is something when it becomes nut cutting time that you truly need to make sure that you're in the right spot and have a guy that's going to be able to deal with it. I told you, I thought Matt Ryan did a great job with that when it was really tough times. And I think they're realizing now, it will be interesting to see, but I think they're realizing now that there's some element of resiliency maybe they didn't believe they necessarily had before this year.
Yeah, so that's great. I think the quarterback discussion was really rich there. Let's actually, Arjun Menon, who was actually one of my interns at PFF before I left, he says, how much of the emotional team captain, face of the franchise factor would you, Thomas, say influences contract negotiations between, the front office of the Giants and Saquon Barkley? Because as he iterates on the next, comment here, historically paying running back second big contracts haven't worked out that well. And, Barkley is, because of his volume, is sort of hitting that stage where guys sort of struggle, later on in their career. What would you like? What does a good contract here look like for Barkley? And does that, sort of face of the franchise thing factor in when you are negotiating with him in this instance?
Look, I've been around some running backs that have face of the franchise over the years, and they are important. I'm not talking about Devontae Freeman. That was different, right? And we all remember that Devontae's agent coming out with a contract offer as we were on the bus on the way to practice. Unbelievable. And Devontae, I thought, was a really good running back. That's beside the point. I thought I needed to express that. But some of the running backs having been around, not only Corey Dillon when we were in New England over those years, but when I think about even Michael Turner back in the early years and on that we have had that I've been around, they're important. But to your point, I really do believe that it's tough for me to think about signing a running back to a huge contract because, again, as evaluators, we do believe that you can get a really good value guy in the 4th, 5th, or 6th round sometimes. We used to laugh because we used to look at Denver, right? And we used to look at, where Coach Shanahan, I'm talking senior Shanahan, used to just pull them out, man. He would pull those guys and get them working in the right system, and they were running really well. So love Saquon Barkley for a lot of reasons. I'm more concerned about what they do with the quarterback than the running back. And it would be great to have him back. I understand that, but I just don't know if that's something that they need to be focused on. Now, that said, there's no question it's heavy on their minds because they realize how productive he can be. Again, what's he at 1,300 yards this year, I think?
Yeah, he's had a really good year, 1,300 yards on the ground, another 340 or so through the air, 10 about 10 touchdowns. So yeah, I mean he's been productive again, which is certainly a thing. I want to give you your flowers a little bit here though. When I look at the 2008 rushing leaders, obviously Adrian Peterson, the 7th overall pick out of Oklahoma, with 1,760 yards rushing that year. But somebody that you picked up, Michael Turner, 1,699 yards, 17 touchdowns on the ground in his first year with the Falcons. Like Michael Turner was, before he went to Atlanta, his most famous play was breaking up an Indianapolis perfect season in what was the RCA Dome back then. He was a backup running back, and not a lot of tread on his tires, but it obviously earned and understood the league really well while he was backing up LaDainian Tomlinson. I remember, prior to Adrian Peterson, the Vikings did a similar thing with Chester Taylor, who was the backup for Jamal Lewis in Baltimore. like there are tons of instances where not only can you get running backs who are later on in their career, like Amon Green was another one where Green Bay signed Amon Green or trade. I can't remember if they traded or signed him, but Amon Green was the backup in Seattle to Chris Warren, and then was, you know, a great running back there. Like there are just so many paths to getting an effective running game that don't require you to give a running back a humongous deal, right? And that you can either get a guy who's played as a backup before with not a lot of tread, or get a guy later on in the draft. And it just, to me, seems like, you know, every single time we're like, oh, this one is different, and they're all the same kind of thing.
So if I could add, and great points there, as they always are, remember, I think back on the Michael Turner thing again, not to go too retro here, but, you know, Matt Ryan was young, right? Daniel Jones is still young, I think, in the scope of it all. To have a bona fide run game is really, really important. Not saying you can't do it, you know, later in a draft or different. I'm not, by the way, I'm sure you're not. I'm not a big fan of spending money in free agency. Michael Turner was very different. It was a very, very different situation. You go in the draft, you get someone who's young, vibrant, and a lot to them, who runs really hard. I mean, there's ways. Like, I keep coming back to looking at run games and looking at Arthur Smith and what he's doing with the Falcons. I mean, they're running with guys who are more middling guys. No, all due respect. I mean, it's amazing, I think, what he's doing with he and his offensive line coaching, creating a really good run game. Back to a quarterback like this, make sure that you have a run game firmly in place, and an understanding not only the run game itself. I'm going to tell everyone there is a confidence level that a quarterback has going into a game, like Matt Ryan had to do in those early years, that you know you have that. The run game, you have the versatility to toss it out, you know, high percentage shots to the running back. That versatility element is really, really important as a running back. So in the end, you have a young quarterback, make sure you continue to grow, and make sure you have a plan. If you ever do move on from Saquon Barkley, there better be a bona fide plan there, or there becomes a little bit of a womp element to it. And all of a sudden you're running in the mid pack. And then things get anxious, you know, again, projecting the next year for Daniel Jones, and the run game's not operating. Then it becomes a lot more complicated.
Yeah, one thing we did notice when I was doing some work, you know, on running offenses, though, is if you look at any stat you look at, whether it's yards before contact or perfectly blocked play rate or something like that, the better the quarterback is at designed runs, the easier it is on the running back. And maybe you are seeing a little bit of that with Barkley's resurgence, is that Daniel Jones has some gravity. We talked about that with Malik Willis. But you look at, you know, the running backs that have success as far as they have the easiest plate in front of them. It's the Ravens running backs. It's the Cardinals running backs. It's the Jaguars running backs with Lawrence and his ability to run. And so maybe, you know, if you keep Jones, maybe you let Barkley walk, because, you know, that next running back that comes in is going to have an easier time of it because the quarterback has some movement ability as well. So those are all things. And those are things, by the way, not to plug, well, actually to plug SumerSports. These are the nonlinear effects that we are looking at as a part of what we're working with at SumerSports, something that we're really trying to, you know, hone in on here. So speaking of a team that has a running back that is doing really well, and also a running back who, much like Daniel Jones, did not get his fifth-year option exercise, the Las Vegas Raiders. You know, Josh Jacobs leading the league in rushing right now. Mm-hmm. The Raiders just sat down Derek Carr, you know, last week. He's been the quarterback since basically week 1 of 2014 for this franchise. They sat him down. They started Jarrett Stidham. Presumably they're going to move on from Derek Carr. Firstly, it's not Derek Carr's fault. Like this, I think there's a really tough part of this discussion where everybody's like, why are they punishing Derek Carr? And why is it this, that? And it's like, I said this on Twitter the other day. I said, Derek Carr is not the Raiders' biggest problem, but all of their big problems are hard to solve when they're paying Derek Carr that much money. And that, I think, is the really hard part about football, where Derek Carr can be a good pro and he can be a great, I think he's been a pretty good quarterback, but pretty good is not enough to win in an AFC West that includes Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, and, you know, what the Denver Broncos presume is an improving Russell Wilson after this year. And so the Raiders are going to move on. What is the path forward here for them?
Well, first of all, let me ask you, do you have it in front of you? What is Derek Carr's number right now?
Yeah, so Derek Carr, so he signed a new deal. And I'm going to pull this up. Our good friends at Over the Cap. So Derek Carr's cap number this year on his new deal was 19.3 million. I think even at his reduced abilities here, he's a surplus at that number. But then in 2023, his cap number is 35 million. He is 5 million dead to cut, 5.5 million dead to cut, 29 in cap savings. And then the following year, 2024, he's 44 million cap number, 40 million in cap savings to cut, 3.7 million in dead money with that cut. So, once you get to that 43 million mark, Thomas, you are the same cap hit as Patrick Mahomes, right? And I think, Jason Fitzgerald said this really well on his podcast. It's like, you need the gap between what you're making and what the great quarterbacks are making to be smaller than the gap in talent between you two, right? Or to be bigger, I'm sorry, than the gap between you two. So if your salaries are close to the Mahomes and the Josh Allens of the world, your talent better be that close as well. And unfortunately, in the case of Carr, even though you're a good quarterback, that talent gap is substantial and the pay gap is not as big.
So this has similarities again, coming into an organization where you don't have a bond necessarily with the quarterback was already there, a lot of money. Remember, Josh McDaniel comes from New England, Bill, very economically sound. For him to be thinking about every game that things might go awry, that they're spending as much money as they are on Derek Carr, beside the fact that he's a very good person, that's not the point here. I get it, is more, wow, what we can do with a younger guy or Jarrett Stidham or what may be out there, in the future can be so much more beneficial to us. And so I don't think it's a difficult decision. I think you go out there and you really look and see how you could potentially secure a trade and see where it goes. What that would be, I mean, we had this discussion before, right? Is that a third or is it a fourth round? Would people say, are you kidding me? That's a second. No, you and I both know it's not going to be that. I don't believe so. Where is it going to be? It will be really interesting to see how this plays out. But I think that's what it is. I think it's seriously trying to secure a trade. I think there's going to be someone out there that are going to look at Derek Carr and say, he's a good quarterback and he can help this organization while we're trying to figure out our quarterback spot.
Well, and that does take, I don't want to merge topics here, but I do think like the league, I do think the Raiders are in a good position to trade Carr for a few reasons, because there are teams that have tasted some success this year in a league without that many great quarterbacks. You look at the Dolphins went from 8-3, now they're 8-8, right? And there are questions about their quarterback and his ability to stay healthy. The Jets went from 7. I think the Jets are a classic team. They went from 7-4 to 7-9. The Titans went from 7-3 to 7-9. The Commanders went from 7-5. Now they're 7-8-1. With Carson Wentz not working. The Seahawks went from 6-3 to 8-8, with Geno Smith having started out very, very well and now playing okay football, not great football. And, I think a lot of those teams would say, oh, well, we were good until our quarterback got found out, right? And then, or we couldn't keep a quarterback above ground, and maybe Derek Carr is the guy there. But I think to your point, everybody who says Carr is worth, let's say a first round pick or a second round pick, you're trading in these instances more for the salary than you are the draft pick. And so, if you bring along with him those numbers, the 34 million, the 43 million, and I know it's not that easy, but if you're a team, you're eating that contract in addition to sending that pick. And additionally, if you're the Raiders, you're sending over those numbers as opposed to eating them. And so this is a situation where for the Raiders to offload Carr is valuable, and they're probably going to take less of a draft pick in so doing. I do want to bring up something, and this is important, and this is part of kind of this team building aspect. Since the Raiders have had Carr at quarterback, these have been their first round picks. And again, this is part of the whole deal.
Yep.
Khalil Mack, that's a hit. Amari Cooper, that's a hit. Then it started getting bad. Carl Joseph, Gary and Conley, Colton Miller's been okay. Cleveland Farrell's still on the team, but Josh Jacobs is a hit. but he didn't even get a 5th-year option because of positional importance. Then you go, Jonathan Abram has been on two teams just this year already. Henry Ruggs, obviously that didn't work out for off-field reasons, but it was also not working on-field either. Damon Arnett, Alex Leatherwood, who already has been traded, and then this year they traded their first-round pick for Devontae Adams. This is one where I think and drafting is hard, and sometimes the mistakes along the roster, or mistakes or just bad luck around the roster, get put on a quarterback's shoulders. This is why it's important to, when you pay a quarterback elite money, he better be elite, because you've had similar stretches of bad drafting out of teams like Kansas City, and similar strings of bad drafting and I don't mean bad and I mean unlucky. You had similar strings of unlucky drafts for New England, right? But when the elite quarterback covers the multitude of sins, the kind of above average but not elite quarterback, those are the excuses that he can have, but they're not excuses if you end up getting fired as the general manager or the head coach. And so that's just a lesson. That is the problem with having a quarterback who's not necessarily a great quarterback, because unlucky situations along the rest of the roster hurt you that much more.
So if I might, we're talking about the Raiders and we're talking about, some of their draft picks, and I have a great deal of respect, for Mike Mayock. Mike works his butt off, and Mike unfortunately was in a situation with the Raiders with a head coach who obviously had a huge ego and wanted to be very, very involved in everything. And he had final say, and it became very complicated at a lot of levels. And John Gruden is an excellent coach, but his background is not picking, adeptly picking players and managing. And he had an owner that really liked him. It was complicated, is what I'm saying. And so everyone can sit here and heap on Mike. Really, there's a lot more blame going in different directions in that organization. And of course, Mike didn't get an opportunity to continue. I think, did Mike have 3 years there? Was it 3 or 2?
I think so. Yeah. And I think you're right though, right? It was always, I think it was clear that Gruden was buying the groceries and cooking. And I always felt like he was a great cook. When you look at Carr's efficiency numbers with Gruden and without him, it was very, great. But to your point, and that again, expound on this a little bit. When you are a general manager, you have to take responsibility for the picks, even if they're not necessarily yours. How hard is that? It must be difficult for a guy like Mayock to have had less power than maybe it appeared. Because again, and I try to be very careful with how I word this.
Mm-hmm.
There is not a lot of evidence that picking players is picking players is more luck than it is anything else. Luck is a first order term.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said bad drafts. I correct myself. Some of these picks are just unlucky. Like the Henry Ruggs pick is unlucky, right? Things like that. But it's still your name attached to it, regardless of what goes into it.
Well, and look, this is a whole other topic and a very interesting topic another time when you start talking about coaching and general managers and scouting coming together and trying to decide on how you're going to put together the team. Ultimately, who has final say within the organization will decide on that, 53rd player. Hopefully you have a really good relationship with your head coach and your general manager. I felt I had that, again, I've said it many times, with Dan Quinn and Mike Smith in my earlier tenure with the Falcons. I was very fortunate. I know people that I'm very close with who have been beating their heads against the wall in situations like that. I allude to that situation here, with the Raiders, because I think about it and I look back. By the way, a little funny story, and I've addressed John Gruden on it before. He was the most negative on the networks about our trade up for Julio Jones. And if you ever watch it, if you ever get a chance to watch it, I think I told everyone, holding arm in arm with Arthur Blank and some of the people that have already heard it, forgive me for this. And, we're all excited about watching it. And all of a sudden we move up and we pick Julio, and John Gruden, play after play after play after play, he is killing them, showing drop balls by Julio Jones, alluding to the fact this is one of the biggest mistakes that will ever take part in the draft. And so obviously I have strong feelings about that, of course. But my point back to either John or anyone, the coaching situation and the GM situation, we've said it many, many times. If you're on the same wavelength and you have an understanding of what you need, you hopefully are able to work together on it. And I've kind of taken this off. I apologize, but I did want to make sure that it was very clear that this is not the situation. There is not all on Mike Mayock. Far, far from that.
Yeah, and I think that that's the thing. It's like, and that's what makes football so great, but that's also what makes football so frustrating is you do everything as a team, you win and lose as a team. And, the situation in Vegas, I mean, they made the playoffs last year. And frankly, I think if you look at this team is actually better, I think fundamentally than the team last year, but there are good components to it. And they did build a contending-ish team. And, for reasons that were unfortunate, like they weren't able to sort of see it through. And now they have to rebuild. And go ahead.
No, exactly. And I'm staying on the Raiders right now because it's really important. Do you remember reading recently about Rich Bisaccia and how, I mean, to me, that's fascinating, right? I mean, you have a group of players who loved him. They decided not to go in that direction. He is one of the better coaches out there, right? Of those of you who know Rich Bisaccia, I mean, he should be a head coach, just like I believe there are other special teams coaches out there that are adept enough. And by the way, that's a whole other topic. Oftentimes people think you can't have a head coach, who was a special team guy. He just doesn't get the whole element of an offense or a defense. You know what? The crazy thing about it, normally that special team coach has a great understanding of everything and an understanding of evaluating players and putting players in the right spot, understanding athleticism, movement, all of that needs to be done when you're building a team. All those people that were negative about the special teams coaches over the years, we've seen what happen, with the Ravens. I mean, it can happen. And there are some really good coaches out there that, a little aside, I just hope owners understand that as we're talking about this, it doesn't always have to be an O coordinator or a D coordinator. It's also
in fact, I don't even know if those skills necessarily transfer unless, you are one of the top end guys like a McVay or a Shanahan. I don't even know if, it necessarily has to be. And in fact, you look at Bisaccia's work in Green Bay, and I know they've had some struggles, but you look at Keyshawn Nixon has absolutely changed the complexion of that Green Bay Packers team and going from 4-8 to 8-8 and playing everybody's darling, the Detroit Lions this weekend for a chance to make the playoffs after they were left for dead just a month ago. So you're absolutely right. Bisaccia, the Packers special teams cost them a chance at the Super Bowl in 2014. It cost them a chance at the Super Bowl in 2021. And they finally get a guy in that room that has something to him. And of course, you see a turnaround there. It does show, how important coaching is. And I think you've beaten the drum as hard as anybody, as far as, assistant coaches and why they matter. Let's go back again to this idea of quarterbacks, because I briefly talked about it. You look at the Dolphins, their losing streak, right? You look at the Jets, their losing streak, the Titans, their losing streak, the Commanders, their losing streak, and the Seahawks, they haven't had a losing streak. Actually, in fact, they won last week against the Jets, but they've fallen off since starting 6-3. All of them have basically what are non-elite quarterbacks. And, I think that this is another example of, and maybe you can expound upon this, why the search should always go on for quarterback. Because if you don't have an elite guy there, I think of like an ace in baseball. If you have an ace starting pitcher, you're just not going to have that many losing streaks because his turn comes around and the guy's going to give you 7 or 8 innings of 2-hit ball, and you're going to win a freaking game and get yourself out of the streak. None of these teams have that kind of guy. And so even though I think you come up for air, and you say the Jets have had a very encouraging year. You come up for air and you think the Titans really fought hard for Mike Vrabel. You come up for air and you think the Commanders for the 3rd straight year have played pretty hard for Ron Rivera. They're still not going to do anything meaningful until they get a real quarterback. And does that make the price tag for some of these guys? The CJ Stroud, who played wonderfully last week in the college football playoff, the Bryce Youngs of the world, the Will Levitts, does that make the price tag for these possibly elite quarterbacks in the drafts that much higher?
I believe so. You know me, I can get on my pedestal and start talking about quarterbacks. I just don't think you win consistently. We know you don't. I mean, let's call it the way it is. You're not winning, excuse me, with a middling quarterback. You can win some games, and you can, maybe make yourself respectable because you have nothing else online during a certain season, and you can win some games. I get it. But if you're talking about having a vision as an organization and you can't build around that person, and you're dealing with players that are solid, we like to call, well, whether it's above average, adequate, whatever the verbiage is, it's not very good or excellent or rare. And we all want to continue, to your point, always looking for that. So I think it's vital. And sometimes the great thing about teams like Bill, and there were, Belichick and other teams out there, and I'm not sure who's very outspoken about this, but they will always take a quarterback. If they don't work out, they don't work out. And I'm not talking about the first 2 rounds. I'm talking about even later. Yeah. Always working with the quarterback and trying to find that number 2 that can be a legit number 2, step up as a number 1 when you're in a situation like this, when someone gets hurt, right? There is something really, really solid about that. And I will admit to you, I did not do a good job with that. I mean, meaning I was completely glossed over by the fact that Matt Ryan had such amazing durability. Remember, 14 years that he was there, I was there for 12 and a half. 1.5 games of missed time. So you get caught up in that when you're in a situation where you have a guy that's really, really regular. I'm sure, well, it's a whole different situation, but I'm sure there are situations like that, maybe at Green Bay and some of these other teams. Like Matt Ryan's different, right? So I didn't have someone in the hopper where I would have liked to. And I think towards the end, maybe that team would have appreciated that more and not have as much pressure on them to bring in, Mariota this year.
Yeah, when you even look at one of the great obviously you look at the Eagles and they're set up completely because they took a flyer on Jalen Hurts. Dallas was able to get out of the Tony Romo problem contract because of Dak Prescott, that draft pick there, and the surplus he was. And you even look back in the history of the NFL, like Aaron Rodgers was not a one-off for Green Bay. I mean, this is a team that traded a first-round pick for Brett Favre while Don Majkowski was the quarterback. Then you had, Ty Detmer was a Heisman Trophy winner. Shout out to our friend Paul Saban, who, by the way, just sent me a text message saying that my Minnesota accent came out when I said the word antagonistic, which it comes out every once in a while. Ty Detmer, Mark Brunell was a Packer. Matt Hasselbeck was a Packer. Aaron Brooks was a Packer. Kurt Warner was a Packer. JT O'Sullivan was a Packer. JT O'Sullivan, by the way, listener of this show, has a great quarterback school YouTube channel that you should watch if you want to learn a little bit more about the quarterback position. So like that was a team that was always, and they have had unprecedented success at the position for 30 years. And they always thought that they needed somebody else there. Matt Flynn got a $15 million deal for being, and Matt Flynn was the second they took Brian Braum in the 2nd round, the year that Rodgers became the starter, and they took Matt Flynn in the 7th round. And like, again, you have to take shots at the position, but you also have to chase elite talent at the position. And because I think that the Carr thing just shows you just can't have consistency. And I know this is an anecdote. I know an anecdote is not a substitute for rigorous analysis. But if you look at the AFC, the top 5 seeds in the AFC, here are the win streaks that those teams are on. Kansas City is on a 4-game winning streak. Buffalo is on a 6-game winning streak. The Bengals are on a 7-game winning streak. The 4th seed Jaguars are on a 4-game winning streak. The 5th seeded Chargers, 4-game winning streak. Awfully hard to do that when you don't have a great quarterback. And who are those quarterbacks? Mahomes, elite. Allen, elite. Burrow, elite. Trevor Lawrence, I'm going to make a bet that he's going to be pretty damn good. And then Justin Herbert, who's already good. Pretty hard to be bad consistently and all the time when you got guys who are that cream of the crop. And, if you're a team and you're the Seahawks and you're trying to win a Super Bowl with a Geno Smith type, you can get lucky and do it. But I'm going to bet against you all the time if that's the case. So
can I jump back in here? Because this is important. We talked about being, if we need to ever banter on this, you and I have bantered before, jokingly, of course, about, Thomas, like, why don't you move that quarterback before he has that big contract, right? You want to talk about that for 30 seconds. With your backdrop and what you just said, does that change your thoughts about we can say, be good, move on from that quarterback, but there's just there is a dearth of quarterbacks, right?
Yeah. I think so we talked about Chris Jones last week on the Wednesday show. We got a lot of crap from Kansas City fans.
Yep.
I think for every position other than quarterback, you want to move on a year early. I think for quarterback, it's okay to move on a year late. Mm-hmm. And so you think about, and I think the anecdote is Green Bay this year. So we all talk about, I was even a little bit quick to the gun here. Like, do you move on and just play Jordan Love? Do you figure out what you have in Jordan Love? And ultimately, and I know Rodgers hasn't played great down the stretch. Like, he's played better and he was terrific the other day. But like, I would rather play one more year of an elite quarterback and take my chances. And if he's washed, that's fine. Then give up and trade him a year early and have, Desmond Ridder or Marcus Mariota at the helm. And Green Bay is a classic example of this. They started 4-8. They're drawing deader than anybody. And now they're in the playoff race. And frankly, if they beat Detroit Sunday, they have, if I look at Pinnacle Sports, the 5th highest odds to win the NFC, and they're going to be the 7th seed. And all of that is because they have a great quarterback.
Yep.
So like, I think you want to move on early from every non-quarterback, and I think you want to move on late from your great quarterback. And if you have to eat a year and be bad, I mean, even look at Denver. Peyton Manning was horrendous his last year, and they still won a Super Bowl. Like, because he played well enough down the stretch to keep the thing on the tracks. I just think that's the way to go. And even Brady, his last year in New England was like not great, but that team was 12-4. Brady's hasn't been great this year, but you know what? Tampa Bay is going to be, I think, scary for some teams in the playoffs this year. So I agree with you. I think you hang on to a great quarterback longer than any other position.
Correct.
All right, let's go to some listener questions. This is a great one. This is about our discussion the other day. This is from Andre Horatius99 on Twitter. If the secondary is a weak link system, how high would you draft a cornerback, even if he is a great prospect?
Oh, can you repeat that again, please? Because I was
so we talked about how the secondary, like even if you have an elite corner, it depends upon your weaker guys, right?
Right.
What is is there a place where taking a cornerback is too high in the draft?
Okay, yes, I'm so sorry because we had a great conversation about this. You brought some really interesting thoughts to my mind, and since then I've been thinking about it. It's still really tough to think that you're going to go with a more average overall secondary, and I get your point, but there's something like motivating about going out there in a huge game, national television, to butt your guy up against the best receiver out there and to know that you have an opportunity to go toe to toe. That is a big thing. It's a morale thing, right? To know that you have that one player. I often went in thinking, yes, the closest we ever came again to having what we thought were 2 shutdown corners, everyone else could argue with me, was Robert Alford. We took in the second round. And again, I mentioned this the other day, right? When we're talking about corners as well as, Trufant. And those were 2 good corners, right? I felt like we could build around them and have the more average group behind them as long as we had the 2 guys in place, one being the shutdown in Trufant. And yet it's tough for me to think that I would not, given an opportunity, take a corner and not have one of those corner spots, as your stud out there. That's my answer.
Yeah. So like, I guess it really does depend upon where you are in your roster construction, right? Because like I would say, we talked about Cincinnati the other day. If I was where Cincinnati was in 2019 going into 2020, and you have one of the worst defenses in football, and you don't have great personnel, I don't think I'd start a defense with a corner. Like I don't think I would. Like I would probably go for an edge player or an offensive player before I went with corner.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's some aspect, like when you think about New England went out and got Stephon Gilmore and Darrelle Revis to complete the defense, right? Mm-hmm. And to your point, that was a guy where Belichick could line him up over the ace and say, we got, everything. We're building the plane around you now. And so I don't think there are any hard and fast rules there. But I do think it's a good discussion topic. I actually sent you some basketball notes that I've been reading. There's this book called Spaced Out, which if you want to, a recommendation, I thought it was a really cool discussion about like how instead of positions in basketball being about height, they're about traits now. And you sort of like, you fix the players and then you optimize the roles. And I think that that's kind of my issue with the secondary, but I do think there are exceptions to that. So that's a very good question. I do want to get to some live listener questions. We want to reward the people who have come and listened to the show. So I want to take 3 more, Thomas, if that's okay with you. Here's a question from Taylor Vaughn Thaxton, who actually had a question last time, which was really good. How do you distinguish between a quarterback is playing at an elite level and when he's an elite quarterback? Referring to like Fitzpatrick with the Jets, or even Kirk Cousins at time with the Vikings. How do you do that? Because it's got to be like, it's hard, right?
Yeah, it's hard. How do you do it? An elite player versus one that's playing an elite level? Is that?
Yeah, exactly. So like, how do you like Geno Smith earlier this year? I think we all can see that Geno's not elite, but he's putting up elite numbers. Is it just kind of like one of those, like, you're on the house floor and you're like, you can't define porn, but you know what it is when you see it? Like, is that like the quarterback thing? Like, you can't define an elite quarterback, but you know what it is when you see it? Or is there maybe more concrete examples of what you can do?
Well, look, I mean, the most basic approach is we have to look at the history of these quarterbacks, right? And I love what Geno was doing up to this point. I don't know where you value him now, but it was great. I felt like he deserved it after that many years of a lot of naysaying out there toward him. But, I don't consider someone in a 1-year situation or a half a year situation as being elite, even if he's had really good games, because to me, in the very end, I'll leave it at this. It is a total package element, right? It's not only a performance on the field, it's everything. It's his ability to understand. And look, maybe he does parlay this into a legit contract this year. And I hope for his sake he does. It will be interesting to see what people pay him if he does.
I agree. A similar situation here. If Lamar is a Raven next year, what do the Ravens do with Roquan Smith? Paying him top linebacker money seems like bad roster building, but letting him walk also seems impossible spot for a GM who just traded a second and fourth round pick for him. This is a great question because I think, it is like my inclination is to let him walk and get the comp pick and just say, hey, we really appreciate the time you spent with us because it's easy. You can access linebackers in free agency, but he also has changed the complexion of that defense. So I can understand why some people would want to keep him. Lamar is going to cost almost all the cap space the Ravens have if they do extend him. So it does present Eric DeCosta with a conflict.
When you have a stud there in that situation, and they had one. When I think about Baltimore and what Ozzie did forever, and now what Eric DeCosta is doing as a GM, they make sure they have those studs on that defense that just they're just oozing with confidence and ability, and they'll go toe to toe with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I love it. That's not easy, right? You could look at all the numbers that you as a data scientist would say, like, what are you thinking? You just move on from them. Take a deep breath and move on. That's great. Then all of a sudden you have, again, you're putting yourself in a spot where you have a guy who's not as adept, not as much of a leader. And it's amazing how that can bring you down. And if you, in fact, lose 1 or 1.5 or 2 games or whatever it may be, because you don't have the proper lead and you don't have the proper, defensive situation, you kick yourself, if that's possible, many times, right? Because you're like, why did I make that move? I was thinking much more about money. And if you have an owner and you're smart about the rest of your roster and where you are with your building and your finances, I think you can still keep a player like that and still thrive for years to come on it. But it's not easy, and it's not just about the numbers. And you and I've talked about it. Sometimes it sounds like the smart thing to do, and I get smart. Just like we would talk about our over the cap guys. They're very smart guys. And yet sometimes there's a bigger picture to it that, a lot of analysts would say, well, you're being too soft, you're being too empathic. And my feeling is when you're building a team and you're building a locker room, there is so much more to think about than just the numbers. We talked to Paul Tudor Jones our founder and our chairman, oftentimes about it. It's so important in our business to make sure that we are categorical with our analysis and our numbers. Yes, but we can't ever stop thinking about the other elements of building the team, which are really, really important. And I'm going to say that forever, just like anyone in football would. Even the most driven Kwesi Adolfo-Mensahs in the league, they're going to say the same thing as they are around it. They understand the importance of it. Sorry for my dive.
Yeah, there's actually a couple things to think about here. Firstly, the Ravens have moved on from a couple players in this position. They moved on from Yannick Ngakoue after trading, with Minnesota for him. They also moved on, and that was an outside linebacker, a rush guy. But then they also moved on from C.J. Mosley, a first-round pick, who was a great linebacker for them. And he went on with the Jets and has had, mixed reviews because of injuries and COVID and stuff like that. But even then, I think if you're the Ravens, you wonder to yourself, well, moving on from C.J. Mosley caused them to take Patrick Queen, and Patrick Queen struggled until Roquan Smith got there. And, you think about if, I would really, this is sort of my, and it's hard to quantify, but again, we at SumerSports are trying our darnest to quantify this. I would only pay a veteran deal to a player who enhances other players. And that one is a quarterback clearly does that, but you can make an argument that Roquan Smith has done that for Baltimore. I know their opponents have been easy over the last few weeks so that their numbers are better, but that is, I think that I would probably still walk on him, but you have to think about, if you are going to pay veteran contracts to players, they have to be players who elevate other players, in my opinion. So, there's a chance that Roquan's that guy.
And by the way, everyone remember this. You also have an owner in the wings telling you, or oftentimes alluding to the fact, hey man, are we sure we're going to make this move? And oh, by the way, I can't stress it enough. Guy sells 1 million jerseys a year. The guy is one of our spokespeople. There are other elements that you think, well, you're the GM, tell the owner it's his train set. And in the end, if the owner really wants you to maintain the consistency of holding some of the players on your roster, it happens. No one wants to admit it, but it happens.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was a great question to end on. This has been a really fun podcast, Thomas. I know we've been a little long, but obviously our listeners have stuck with us for this whole time, and we really appreciate all of you. Next week we have our company on site, so we might be recording on different days just because travel is Monday and travel is Wednesday. So we'll keep you abreast on that. Follow at SumerSports on Twitter for all news related to this podcast. Follow us on YouTube. We are nearing 500 subscribers on YouTube, which is really cool. Subscribe to us on YouTube, but we'll send alerts there as well. We really appreciate you all for joining us. And if on your favorite podcast platform, please subscribe, rate, and review. We love all of the feedback that you guys have been giving us. The feedback is what makes this show better and better each week. And we really do appreciate all of you for listening in with us. So for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 18 of the SumerSports Show.